Netflix just released a new series called The Haunting of Bly Manor. Apparently it's done by the same person that did The Haunting of Hill House, which I really enjoyed last year. Not sure when I'm going to get to watch the entire series, so I wanted to talk about two other movies that were based off of the same book. The Turning of the Screw. Not to be confused with The Taming of the Shrew, which I used to do when I was younger. I used to confuse The Taming with the Shrew with The Turning of the Screw. Anyways, let's start by talking about the 1961 classic The Innocents. I'm embarrassed to admit that I had not seen this film until just now. I had it on my watch list, but for some reason I hadn't watched it yet, and I typically like movies from that era. Like The House on Haunted Hill, Dementia 13, The Haunting. All of those I've seen before multiple times, especially Dementia 13, because that used to be, at one point, my sister's favorite film in middle school, and she used to watch it every week. So I've seen Dementia 13 multiple times, but for some reason I had not seen The Innocents. Side note about Dementia 13, it is extremely underrated in my opinion, and a lot of things that they give credit to Halloween for doing first or Black Christmas for doing first were actually done in Dementia 13 first. But Dementia 13 never seems to get the same type of recognition. Anyways, I decided to watch The Innocents because I had shown my sister the trailer for The Turning, and she said, "That's a remake. I've seen this movie before. It was called The Innocents." And so that's why we're here now. The story centers around a young governess named Mrs. Givens, who's charged with taking care of an orphan girl named Flora and her brother who's away at boarding school. She's hired by the children's uncle, who really does not want to be bothered with children at all. I mean, literally, he says to her, "Don't bother me, I don't want to be bothered." When Mrs. Giddens arrives to the estate, Flora is basically living there alone with just groundskeepers and maids. Flora is very happy to see Miss Giddens and is quick to tell her that she has no friends. Shortly thereafter, her brother Miles returns from boarding school, having been expelled, and that's when things get strange. Miles' mannerisms are too grown. I mean, he speaks to Miss Giddens like a grown-ass man and openly flirts with her, which is really creepy considering he looks to be 8 or 9 years old. Seeing Miles try to mac on Miss Giddens is discomforting because of his age. The movie is actually very subtle about it until it's not. He does little subtle things like the way he touches her face, but then later on in the film he does something way more blatant, which I won't spoil. I'll just say I've never seen a child try to molest an adult. Well, except for if you've seen The Strange Thing About the Johnsons. Oh, and there was that other time when I was working at an elementary school, and on Valentine's Day a first grader smacked me on the ass and told me I could be his Valentine. That was very inappropriate. I won't describe the ending of this movie because I really want as many people to watch it as possible without being spoiled, but I will describe my reaction. I'm watching in this movie and I'm like, oh, so you're really gonna go there? You're gonna do that? Okay. Wow. This film is shot beautifully. A lot of the scenes have an absolutely exquisite composition. Elements are purposely positioned in the foreground and the background to create so much depth that it almost feels like you're watching a 3D movie. And I don't just mean the cinematography, also the editing. I really like the crossfades because they weren't done just as an aesthetic, but the images being crossfaded from one to another connected to each other to progress the story. The costume design was impeccable. This is a period piece, and the dresses that Miss Giddens and Flora wore were amazing and expertly done. They chose an excellent location. The house has a lot of character, and the sets were believable when you compare the interior to the exterior shots. I didn't know that they used sets until I saw some behind the scenes footage. I really would have assumed by looking at the sets that they shot on location. That's how good these sets were. There's so many elements in this movie that I still see more recent movies trying to do, especially how the story unfolds and how the dread scenes are shot. I call them dread scenes because that's the feeling that they give you. They're more suspenseful and filled with dread rather than boo jump scares. And the dread is well earned. Having seen this movie now, I can see the homages that other movies have done to this movie, like in Poltergeist and The Conjuring. Even though those are not exactly the same, those are a little bit more jump scare oriented, which there's nothing wrong with. I enjoy a good jump scare. I'm not a jump scare snob. I'm just trying to be clear with my review on how this movie feels. I think that if you liked something like The Conjuring or Poltergeist, you would like The Innocents. Just know that more of the scares are suspenseful, kind of wind-ups rather than boo jump scares. The movies that I see that are the true children of this movie are movies like The Changeling, The Others, Crimson Peak, Skeleton Key. If those were your jam, I definitely highly recommend watching The Innocents so you can see where a lot of those movies sort of got their inspiration. I'll call it inspiration because those movies were good in their own right, and I don't want to call them copies because they're not copies, but you can definitely see that they were influenced by The Innocents. I'm gonna go check out the remake and I'll be back in a minute to talk about it. This movie is a mess. I will try to talk about the positives before I tear into this foolishness. So let's go. Great outer locations. The grounds look beautiful. That's the positive. The sets are terrible. Every room in the so-called mansion is smaller than the rooms in my first apartment, which was basically so small. It was, I would say, a one-bedroom / efficiency size. It was tiny. Like, there was actually a door to the bedroom, so it technically was not an efficiency, but the size of it could have been an efficiency. But that took me out of it right away because the rooms were so tiny, and houses that size generally don't have rooms that small. Plus, the decor was so ugly. This was supposed to take place in the 90s. I remember the 90s. I don't remember anyone's furniture or decor looking that awful. Even if you weren't around for the 90s, you could look at some media from the 90s and see how things were decorated. Like, I always kind of liked Seinfeld's apartment. It was alright. I did not like how Friend's apartment looked, but I didn't like Friend's, period. So that's the thing. Look at Martin. Martin had a nice apartment, and Pam's apartment was nice. Look at the decor. That was pretty realistic. I don't know why I feel personally attacked by the decor. I just do. Nothing wrong with this movie is the story moves too fast. They rush through the stories that they're trying to tell it really fast for someone with ADHD, which I should feel attacked by that as well because I do have ADHD, and for me to say that this is moving too fast, you know it's moving too fast. But having seen the whole movie, now I know why they rushed the story so fast. It was so they can add a whole bunch of other stuff that wasn't part of the story at all. Like mannequins. Lots and lots of mannequins. Because I guess maybe they had a meeting and someone said, hey, you know what's creepy? Mannequins. And dress forms. Some of them were dress forms. This movie really is one big, hey, look, aren't mannequins creepy? Look at the creepy mannequins. New Flora looks a little bit older than the OG Flora, which I'm not mad at because the way Flora acted in the 1961 version was a little bit young for her age, so it kind of made sense to age her down so that her behavior seemed in line with what a child that age would act like. New Flora is supposed to be 7, but she looks about 5. Well, that is until you know the twist of the story. I mean the original twist of the original story, not the twist in this movie. Miles is made older, which takes away from the creepy factor because in the original he's supposed to be 9 or 10 years old. In this one he just looks like a regular teenager. I didn't like that change at all. Miles in the original was creepy because he was a child that had adult mannerisms. That's not as creepy on a teenager because teenagers have halfway adult mannerisms anyways. Teenagers are in that in-between phase where one minute they're very grown and the next minute they might be having a meltdown like a toddler. It's part of being a teenager. So it took away from the creepy factor. Also, they just made him more of a jerk than creepy. And in the original, He started out subtle, and then things got more blatant. And this, he's blatant from the very beginning. There's no build up to it. OG Miles was more subtle in his machinations, and then he built up to being more obvious in his motivations. I hate what they did to Mrs. Gross's character. I didn't mention her in the review for The Innocents, but I really liked her character, and in this, they completely changed her. She was the main housekeeper in the original, and she was a warm, welcoming presence that often served to kind of fill in the blanks with exposition. The new Mrs. Gross is an asshole. That's her whole character, just a narrow-ass, unpleasant wench. I didn't like that at all. They also added a bunch of the same jump scares over and over again. How many mirror jump scares can you cram into one movie? If I lived in a manor in which every reflective surface gave me a jump scare, after a while I would just come to expect it. It wouldn't even be shocking or frightening anymore. And this movie wants us to believe that, you know, after someone is jump scared with a mirror or reflective surface for the 17th time, that they're going to have the same reaction. They're not. I bet the pitch for this was, let's remake The Innocents, but for the Annabelle Insidious audience. In theory, that could have worked with the right screenwriter and director. Unfortunately, they didn't even make it as fun to watch as Insidious or Annabelle Creation. See how I hop, skip, and jump clean right over that first Annabelle movie? It had one good scene, and that was like the elevator scene, but the rest of the movie was, you can completely skip it and just go straight to Annabelle Creation. If you're interested in more about Annabelle, I will be reviewing that. I'm going to do a second part to my doll-a-thon. I did a doll-a-thon, what was it, last year I think? And I went through a whole bunch of doll movies, and I have more doll movies to come. I'm thinking of doing it in December. It's kind of almost like a Christmas theme, Land of the Toys type thing for the doll-a-thon, so stay tuned for that. The problem with this movie is more the writing than the direction. I take that back. This director may have flubbed when it came to working with the kids, because we know that Finn Wolfhard is a pretty good actor in everything else he's been in. We've seen him in Stranger Things and It, but in this, the performance was not good, and I don't blame that on the child actor. I blame that on the director and the writer. So it's a toss-up between his character being poorly written or the director giving poor direction for how he should act, or a combination of both. That said, I probably feel this way because of how iconic The Innocents is. If I had not watched that first and then watched this, I think I probably wouldn't have as bad an opinion. But since I just watched the original and it was so good, it's hard not to look at this as a failure. I think if you never saw The Innocents or never read The Turning of the Screw, you might enjoy this, except for the very end. The end of this movie was the longest 12 minutes ever. That's hyperbole, but it certainly felt very long. It makes no sense. It undoes the story completely, and you could tell that they just wanted to have a ambiguous ending, except it wasn't clever at all. It was just stupid. I read that this movie had some production issues that resulted in multiple rewrites and people being fired, as well as Steven Spielberg leaving as executive producer. He knows a stinking pile when he sees one, so him leaving the project lets you know everything you need to know about it. This was a horrible remake of The Innocents. It's also a horrible adaptation of The Turning of the Screw. They should have renamed this movie The Haunting of Mannequin House. Now let's talk about a few spoilers. For some reason they added this character of Miss Gibbons' mother who's in a mental facility, which for some reason allows her to paint in an empty pool. Then they pull in, oh, it was all in her head trope and tie that back to her mother. So if it was all in her head, what was up with the opening scene with the original governess being attacked? Like, how can you imagine what happened at a job before you got hired to replace the imaginary person who wasn't there if it didn't happen, for them to get killed for you to be hired? See how that didn't make any sense? That's what this movie is trying to do. This movie is trying to make you accept something that doesn't make any sense. I'm just gonna put a gif of Joe Budden here because this is what I think of this movie. I almost forgot to say my tagline. I've forgotten the last one to say it. I usually say, but don't take my word for it. Watch it for yourself, because just because I hate something doesn't mean you'll love it, and just because I love something doesn't mean you will hate it. Did you see The Innocents or The Turning what do you think of either of those movies, and are you excited to see The Haunting of Bly Manor? Bye.